Welcome to the Updating Your Human Operating System webinar. I'm going to give it just a minute or two for folks to jump on as we go live. And we're going to get into talking about some of the challenges with our current work practices and how those are really breaking our current human operating system. And then with some strategies, what are the 4 pillars to peak performance and how can they help us with updating our human operating system? So I am going to dive in. And while I am doing that, if anybody is in the chat, I know not all of the destinations with which we're live streaming this will have the ability to drop in the chat, but I will be asking for some input and some involvement throughout. So if you are there, go ahead and drop in the chat. And I want to start with just asking the question, what are some of the top challenges either you, your team, your organization are facing right now? What are some of the things that you're navigating, that you're dealing with, that you're looking at in your workplace and in your life right now that are challenging? And while you think on that and kind of drop some of those in the chat, if you're able to do so, I want to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about me and why I'm here talking about this topic to begin with. So, a little bit of my story. I came out of law school and went into work in the corporate space, went through some mergers and acquisitions. As often happens, if you do a good job, they give you more things to do. So I took on legal, HR, IT, customer service, project coordination, order management, a lot of the operations functions throughout my career. Now, where my career took a turn was right around 2020 after I had twin girls. Now, if you told me that when I might have experienced challenges in my life, I would have thought it would have been then. My twins were 9 months old. My son was 4 when the pandemic hit. And so just like everybody, I have my pandemic story of navigating life with small children, 2 working parents at home, and all of the challenges that went with it. But after surviving the year of 2020, I thought I should write a book because that's what you do after a year of challenges is you decide you're going to take on another challenge. And so I started writing a book, and in the spring of 21, I thought I was doing excellent when our workplace got hit with a ransomware attack. And it was that ransomware attack that really changed the game for me. It was that ransomware attack that really was what I point to as the tipping point in which I ended up in full-blown burnout. And I didn't know that at the time. I didn't have the terms. I didn't know what the stages of burnout were back then. But I knew that something had changed and I was no longer as committed, excited, engaged, that something had shifted and changed. And I naively thought I would go start a new business, try something different, take the practices that we had implemented successfully and take them out into the world to other organizations. Because before I burned out, before that experience, my organization was doing great. We had won awards for our programs. We had won awards as a Gallup Exceptional Workplace for 3 years in a row. My team had even surprised me with a Manager of the Year award by Gallup. We were doing excellent. We were doing all of the best practices that everyone said you should be doing from a people and performance perspective. And so once I realized that I had gotten myself into burnout, I wanted to figure out why. What was it that contributed to and got me into that state? And what needed to be different? What needed to be changed to not have that fact? And one of the first things I realized is that I wasn't alone, that actually many others were having similar experiences and had found themselves in states, varying degrees and varying stages of burnout. And it was in that I found this common story of the leader's journey to overwhelm. And that story starts with really high performers, people who are the best, who are the best in their role, can produce a lot, accomplish a lot. And as a result, they get promoted. and they take on more responsibility. They often take on people leadership and people management, but they're still the highest performers. So they're also the ones that are accomplishing the most. So they keep having to also execute while also leading and managing people. Until ultimately, we've given these same leaders, these highly talented leaders, so much to do that they don't have time to lead and manage and teach their people how to do things in a more effective way and to manage them effectively. And they get so overwhelmed that it impacts their ability to communicate. There's not as much time for communication, which leads to unclear expectations. Things are changing so fast and there's not enough communication happening. So people are more likely to be confused. It becomes harder to provide updates as priorities change. So that makes expectations even more challenging. It becomes difficult to understand how your people are performing because you're not actually able to observe or interact with them regularly enough, which means that leaders become really challenged with how to give meaningful feedback and how to give feedback that isn't biased by how often did I see someone in the office or how often have I observed them, because those interactions were so reduced. And then as a result, our performance practices, if we have any at all, become more about checking boxes and filling in forms than really meaningfully impacting and positively having an effect on people's performance. And so what I found when I looked into this research and I wanted to understand this better was that the current state of people in the world today, in this new era of intelligence that we've entered, where we're trying to navigate how does technology and artificial intelligence that has reached such a critically high level interact effectively with human intelligence and create and how do we leverage both of those in a more effective way. We're also seeing some record hitting metrics. So engagement hit a 10-year low. Americans who are satisfied with their life hit a record low. Those that are thriving hit a record low. Those who are struggling on the life evaluation index hit a record high. 30% of people feel respected at work. That is an all-time low. 51% are looking for a new job. 18% are extremely satisfied. That is also a historic low. 51% experience stress a lot of the prior day, and 40% experience worry a lot the prior day. And this is what Gallup is coining the great detachment. And we've moved into this period where human beings are struggling more than they ever have before, especially within the workplace. And at the same time, we're needing more from them. We're needing them to accomplish more and navigate more change in technology all at the same time. So why is it that people are struggling? What is happening in the human operating system today that's causing people to struggle so much? What's changed that's impacting people at work and causing these negative outcomes, causing these negative results? And in order to really understand that, we first have to understand how our human body operates. How does our human system actually work? So a little bit of neuroscience. Our bodies were not necessarily wired to thrive. They were wired to survive. On the screen, what you'll see is a neuron. And in our body, we have neurons throughout our body, and we have neural networks in particular areas where those neurons form pathways together. And they are what tell our body what to do. They're what tell our body what to do both consciously and unconsciously. So when I'm moving my hands, neural connections are firing to tell my hands how I want them to move. Likewise, there are neural messages being sent to tell my heart to beat, my lungs to breathe, my gut to digest food. There are these messages being sent throughout the body. And these messages, primary purpose before anything else, is to survive. The very most important purpose of the human body is to keep the human body alive, is survival. And there's really two key factors that come into play when it comes to survival. The first is, does the body have sufficient resources? So by sufficient resources, it means, does it have the food, shelter, companionship that it needs in order to survive? So if you think about when a baby is born, A baby will cry in order to get the comfort and the food and the safety and the shelter from its caregiver, from its mother or its caregiver who's taking care of it. And we know from research that when a baby cries and is not responded to, it does long-term neurological damage to the baby, to the child, because the body is wired. The reason that's happening is to create that survival. And as a result, the body also wants to conserve those resources. It wants to make sure that it doesn't use resources unnecessarily. And then secondly, the body is wired to avoid predators and threats to our safety. Anything that might cause us pain, our body begins to wire in a way that can protect us from that pain. And it will also associate change with pain, because when things change, it requires more of our resources to be able to navigate or handle those challenges. So, how do these pathways form? How do these connections around survival happen? Well, it all starts with our experiences in our environment. We all live in different environments and we have different experiences from the moment that we're born all the way through our lives. And those environments and experiences then create our ways of being, the ways that we think, feel, and behave. They're the way that we operate and exist and live in the world. And over time, in different spaces, in different places, we develop collective ways of working and living. The way that things get done, the way decisions get made, problems get solved, how we communicate, how we collaborate. They just become so much a part of who we are that they are just our patterns. They're the way in which we accomplish things. And if you've ever worked in different organizations, you've likely seen this where one organization has a certain way in which people communicate or get things done, and another one has a very different approach or different style. Same thing goes with families. Often, when you get married for the first time and you go to visit your in laws and you start to get to know that family, they have a very different way of interacting or being that we have to learn how to adapt to and we have to learn about, because we create these common ways of being or these common ways of interacting. And so this really sets the stage for us as to how our bodies are operating. Now, these are some of the things that maybe you have seen in your organization or in your workplace. And if you have, drop a one in the chat and share with us. If either you or someone in your organization is experiencing any of these things. And these are ways to maybe know whether we're in a state of survival. How do we know if we're defaulting into some of these survival related patterns? Well, first, if you have people who are defensive, resistant to feedback, or overly competitive. If you have people who are avoiding challenging tasks, difficult conversation, or even the workplace itself. If you struggle to make decisions, feel stuck, or you disengage entirely. If you have people who are overworking to please others, neglecting their own boundaries and needs. Any of these examples are examples of where a person is in a survival state, a state of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And each of these are instances where our body goes into a dysregulated state in order to protect us. There are automatic responses. These are due to our patterns. We aren't consciously choosing to go into these states. Our body is automatically switching into these states. One way to think about this is kind of like a dial. And we want this dial to be tuned to the top of this circle. We want to be in a state of play or a state of compassion, warm, loving, open, balance, or a state of calm. We want to be towards the top of this circle. But when we're dysregulated, we end up at the bottom of the circle. And on the left side there, you've got fight, flight, which is when we're in a sympathetic, anxious, tense, angry, irritated, when we're hyper focused, crisis mode, trying to fight off or run away from or deal with whatever's in front of us, survival state. The other side is the dorsal vagal state, or the shut down, numb, burnt out, drained state. And this is a freeze or fawn state. And when those combine in more serious cases, we get to a state of overwhelm where we're hopeless, where we have panic, or we're severely stressed, and we're in a state of despair. And what we're seeing is that people are spending much more time, especially in workplaces, on the bottom side of this dial. And where we really want them to be is at the top. We want them to be in a balanced, coherent, high performance state where they're operating at their best. So, why does this happen? Well, when we experience stress, when we have these stressful events in our lives over time, these experiences begin to build up in our body. And you'll see in the chart there that every time we have a stressful event, it increases our stress baseline. And if we don't discharge that energy to bring us back to our stress baseline, that stress begins to build in our body. And each time it does, our baseline increases. And as it increases, it's almost like we're building up boulders of stress in our body. Like we're performing our and living in our lives, but we're carrying around these boulders of stress with us. And you can see how this could happen, right? Because in our world today, we're not outrunning the predator. We're not actually expending that stressful energy. Instead, we're stressed sitting at our desk or sitting on our couches or sitting in our homes or at work. We're not necessarily moving that stress out of our body. And the consequence that we see is that this stuck stress, the stress that's been built up in our body, makes us more sensitive to perceived threats. It makes us more sensitive to the challenges or things that we encounter in our lives and around us. So, for example, think about when you felt really great first thing in the morning. Nothing bad's happened, and someone says something offensive or critical towards you. It's first thing in the morning, you're feeling good. How do you respond? And then contrast that to it's the end of the day, you're exhausted, you're worn out, maybe you've been dealing with kids or family or challenging situations at work, and somebody's critical of you. How do you respond? And how does that response differ? When we have more stress in our body, when we have a higher stress baseline, it takes less for us to become triggered by traumas and challenges that we're experiencing in our lives. Now, when I use the term trauma, I want to obliterate the myth that traumas only impact people who've had really bad stuff happen to them. When I'm referring to trauma, I'm referring to any type of painful or stressful experience that we weren't able to successfully process in the moment, that we weren't able to expend that stress and bring ourselves back to that baseline. And so when we're stuck in survival, we're going to be more likely to be triggered by traumas, by challenging or stressful events. Things that maybe wouldn't have left a stressful impact in the past may do so now. I love Peter Levine's definition of trauma. Trauma is not what happens to us, but what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness. When we don't have that ability to process and discharge that stressful energy in our body, we are more easily able to then be triggered. And what ends up happening is our nervous system gets stuck in these fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses, and it's not able to return to its baseline. And so it's less about the event and it's more about how we are internally experiencing the event. So, an event that might not be traumatic if you were fully balanced, regulated, and weren't carrying around that stress might cause a trauma because you don't have the window of tolerance to navigate or handle that situation given all the stress that's accumulated in your body. And when we get stuck in survival, we're that much more likely to repeat our past patterns. Our brains and bodies are only interested in surviving. And we know that when we rely on those patterns, those pathways, those ways of being that are the most repeated in our lives, that we're conserving energy, that it's easier for our body to do that, to switch into ways of being that we've existed in before, that we've used before. And what that means is that our body is less able to be creative and innovative, to think critically or solve problems, to collaborate and build connection and trust. It impacts our learning, our growth, our resilience, agility, and adaptability. It prevents the very things that in large part we most want to be accomplishing or we most want to be cultivating in our organizations today. And so we keep repeating these past patterns over and over and over again because they're our default mode. They're our way of operating and our way of being. And what ends up being, and what I ended up finding after understanding and really, really learning about this area is that the world is changing faster than people can adapt. The rate at which technology is increasing and the instability in which that's creating in our world and the challenges it's creating is happening too fast for human beings to adapt to those changes. And the longer we go without expanding our ability to handle these challenges, without adapting and evolving ourselves as human beings, the bigger that gap becomes. And the more challenging, the more we're triggered by those traumas, the more those challenges will create that stress for us. So, what are some of the past practices that are negatively impacting people's performance and well-being? And this gets more to the organization itself, to the organizational operating system that we're running on. And it's almost like if you could imagine that you've got a computer and you're trying to run a computer from 10, 15 years ago, and you're trying to run today's programs on that operating system. That system is going to crash constantly because it's not going to have the capacity to run the complexity of the programs that we ask it to run today. And this is where I thought when I first understood burnout, once I understood what it was, then surely I could avoid it. Surely I could overcome it. But the challenge that I've had is that no matter how much healing I've done, if the environment that I'm operating in is perpetually putting me back into a state of burnout, if those patterns and ways of being are constantly reinforcing the practices that put me into burnout, then I keep finding myself there. So even though I knew what burnout was 3-4 years ago, it's taken me years to rewire those patterns so that I wouldn't keep ending up and putting myself back into that state of burnout. Just because we know it's a problem and we know what the cause of the problem is doesn't actually solve the problem itself. So when we think about updating our work practices for this new era of work, and we think about what work practices were for in a traditional workplaces were built around efficiency and productivity, control and compliance, predictability and stability, minimizing costs, safety and regulation, maximizing profits. They were focused on a set of capabilities and skills and activities that are very different from today's needs. The things that most organizations are wanting today, and drop a 1 in the chat if any of these relate to your organization, are things like adaptability and innovation, autonomy and empowerment, resilience and agility, sustainability, inclusion and safety, purpose-driven work. We're wanting people to solve problems, be creative, communicate really well, navigate really high technology and how to navigate human and AI together. We're wanting people to do things that require a really high level of intelligence and capacity rather than maybe the practices that we've seen in traditional workplaces. So how do some of those workplace practices or the challenges with some of those workplace practices actually trigger past patterns and create truly challenging outcomes for people? So for example, say you have an organization where you have a lot of micromanagers who are very authoritarian. And you have a lot of hierarchical leaders in that organization. If somebody has ever experienced abuse or controlling relationships, manipulation, a lack of autonomy in the past, then they're going to be more likely to experience hypervigilance, doubt their decisions, avoid taking action. They may even rebel against the rules, be passive aggressive, or get stuck and unmotivated. That past experience is going to trigger a pattern, and that response is going to happen again automatically, not consciously. They're not going to consciously avoid taking action, but they're going to be triggered by the situation. Another example is criticism in meetings or public settings. When somebody has experienced a lot of public humiliation or bullying in the past that's made them feel a sense of shame or a sense of inadequacy, this can cause them to want to avoid speaking up, shutting down their creativity, and even having them overcompensate through perfectionism. Another example is unclear or a lack of communication, transparency, or expectations. When we've maybe experienced situations of emotional neglect, inconsistent caregiving, or unreliable authority figures in our past and in our growth, we may have developed patterns of procrastination, a need for excessive reassurance, overworking ourselves to get validation, disengaging, or even freezing and feeling ourselves stuck, unable to make decisions. Another example is unrealistic expectations. So maybe if you're like a lot of individuals I know, maybe you have some really critical, highly critical parents or authority figures who dismissed or humiliated, who were dismissive or humiliated for failures, where you experienced that being dismissed and for not meeting those high expectations. The result can be overworking to exhaustion in order to try to meet those expectations. Alternatively, it might be to procrastinate to avoid experiencing or feeling that failure. You may swing actually between burnout and withdrawal. And then finally, if we are faced with or have to go through a layoff or a sense of job insecurity, which many people are going through right now, it can create a sense of abandonment or rejection. And if we've experienced that before, where we felt unsupported or discarded, it can lead to hypervigilance, overwork to prove our value, hoarding of tasks because we want to make sure we remain relevant, mistrusting our colleagues, and a preoccupation with what if, what might be, what could be. I'm curious if you've experienced any of these examples or if any of these resonate with you. Drop a one in the chat or drop a comment in there. But these are some of the ways that you can see when people are exposed to poor work practices in the workplace, that it can trigger these patterns, and these patterns can automatically kick in that lead to a really distressing experience, and that then cause have a negative impact on their performance as a result. And we can see this playing out in workplaces. I see this in my clients and the leaders that I coach and work with all the time, that when we don't have the best and the most necessary performance practices in place, we end up having these results and these outcomes. So, what can we do about it? How do we get to this better operating system? So, I call this a flexible and adaptable system for enhancing human performance in the workplace to optimize and improve results, foster a peak performance culture, and create more exceptional experiences for people. And I include that last piece because we want to create workplace outcomes, of course, but many of the workplace practices that I used that led me to my burnout experience were creating really positive business outcomes, but they were also burning out the humans that were creating them. And so, how do we create instead practices that create both positive outcomes for the business and the humans in it? And you can see on the right side of this slide that this model that Deloitte uses around human performance, and that when we can create outcomes that are positive for our business and our humans, when we can create the practices that reinforce each other, then you're going to get better outcomes from both areas. You're going to get better results across the board. And so I like to think about that as we can either put in place the practices that will help people to perform at their best and thrive, or will keep being stuck trying to survive, and ultimately they're going to burn out their engines. And we know that if we don't do the maintenance on our car, if we don't take care of our vehicles, then we can experience the engine burning out. We can experience those complications. And the truth is the same for our human beings. If we don't take care of them, we're going to experience the impact and the challenges. And I just so happen to have a computer right now that keeps crashing on me. It's 4 years old and it's reached its limit. And when it overheats, it crashes. And it caused me to really recognize the challenge with how when we don't take care of something, if we were to use our take care of our computers, our assets of computers, by throwing them around, leaving them outside in the rain, having them run 24/7 with full bandwidth, they would burn out quickly too. They would also not last. And so the truth is, as humans, our humans have to have the same type of care that we give to the other technologies and assets and things that we have in our lives, so that we can create the outcomes that we want. When I think of performance, I like to think of it as everybody has a performance mountain and everybody's climbing their own mountain, and everybody's looks a little different. We might be taking different journeys, but everyone has one. And what we want to be doing is thinking about how can we climb that mountain operating at our best? How can we do it in a way that produces the best possible outcomes? And so when you think about climbing a mountain, if you were to go out and climb a mountain, what there are certain things that we want to do to be prepared so that we can enjoy that experience. There are certain things that we need to have on our journey to make that successful. So as you think about that, we think about needing to have to be in the right shape, to have the right physical abilities to be able to make that journey, to have the equipment that we need, the resources, the water, the tools, the things that we need in order to get there, a map to help us navigate it. There are these things that we need to have to make that journey effective, to make it the best journey that it can be. And I like to think about these as the four pillars of peak performing people and cultures. And the first of these is our capabilities. And I want you to think of these as like the tools that you have on your journey. You can't climb a mountain without the right gear. And so you need to have the right set of skills, knowledge, and behaviors in order to make that journey possible, in order to be able to have the capabilities to climb the mountain. The second is our consciousness. And this is really both having our map and being able to read our map. So being aware of our the messages from our body, how to navigate our body and its intelligence, how to use it to its full capacity, and really being aware of how well we're doing and how to use our strengths and talents as we're on our performance journey. The next is our competence. So competence is our level of experience or proficiency. So how well how much have we practiced it? How competent are we at doing it? What is it currently possible or feasible for us to be able to do? And so have we practiced? Have we developed our ability to navigate the terrain that we're going to be climbing? And then finally, and this is the one I think I see the most challenge with today, is do we have the capacity? Do we have the capacity for the journey that we need to take? So do we have the physical strength, the mental resilience, the emotional intelligence, the intuitive awareness to navigate our journey and to make that journey be successful? And so this is, how do we use our full capacity of our human intelligence, or how do we even expand that capacity for our journey? And so when you think about your current performance, you can think about, what do we need to be capable of? What do we need to be aware or conscious of? How competent do we need to be? And what capacity do we need in order to be able to make that journey, in order to be able to be successful on our journey? Now, when it comes to updating our people and work practices around these four pillars in particular, we can't upgrade our work practices like we can our computers. I can't just go order a new computer. Could potentially hire a new person, but we know that comes with a lot of costs. But we can't just upload or handle our computers in the same way we do people. Computers are not conscious living human beings. You can't upload capabilities. You can't just upload the knowledge and skills and people then possess it. You can't upgrade competence. You can't just move people to the next level. They actually have to have the experience to develop that level of competence. And you can't just buy and add more capacity. You can't just add more disk drive space like you can with a computer. Instead, we have to use the neuroscience of human performance for how to increase people's capabilities, how to enhance people's consciousness with practices that integrate insights into the long-term behavior change that we want to see. We have to cultivate competence by consistently supporting and developing people. And then finally, we have to expand capacity by discovering how to really access, align, and apply the full capacity of human intelligence to our challenges. How do we use all of those neural networks that are in the human body so that we can get the best possible results and outcomes so we can perform at our best on our journey? So what does this look like on around these 4 pillars? Well, the first is capability. And again, capability is our skills, knowledge, and behaviors. What do I need to know or understand to be successful? So if we want to operate at peak performance, we've identified that there are really 4 key capabilities for operating at peak performance. And these may be called by different names, but almost every single performance model that I have looked at out there has these 4 key kind of components. The first is around expectation setting. We have to be clear. Our brains they desire clarity in order to work more efficiently. When things are ambiguous, when we're not sure, our brains are constantly trying to figure out and make meaning and make sense of it, and it expends unnecessary energy. So the more clarity and alignment that we can have in terms of our performance, the more easily we're going to be able to use all of our intelligence in pursuit of accomplishing those expectations or accomplishing those results. That means that we have less confusion, we have more focus, we have greater efficiency, and we increase our likelihood of success. The second capability is feedback. And feedback is giving and receiving conscious feedback to ourselves and others. And when we talk about feedback, we're not just talking about constructive feedback or formal performance reviews. When we're talking about feedback, we're talking about really giving conscious, clear, coherent delivery of information to ourselves, about ourselves, and to and from others. And when we do feedback well, when we do it from a place of conscious coherence, it actually builds trust, it increases our self-awareness, and it creates more opportunities for us to keep improving and keep working together to accomplish our goals. The third element of the 4 key capabilities is development. And this is around how do we use our strengths to grow and develop ourselves, to keep improving and adapting and evolving ourselves to accomplish the goals and the things that we're trying to accomplish, to adapt to all this change and all the challenges we talked about earlier. And then finally, we have accountability. And when I say accountability, I don't mean holding other people accountable, but I mean fostering a mindset of high personal accountability where everyone gets clear on those expectations and then commits to and takes accountability for pursuing and accomplishing them and working towards them. And when we do that, when we have that culture of personal accountability and commitment, we have less of the blaming, judging, making excuses, finger pointing, complaining, gossiping. We have less of those challenges and the storytelling, the things that prevent people from really working and operating at their best because we're clear on what to do. We've committed to and taken ownership of that. We are given feedback early and often on how we're doing towards that. And we're consciously working on growing our skills and competence so that we can keep getting better at our performance. The second pillar is the consciousness pillar. And this is really about integrating with what we call a real reflection practice. So this is really about becoming aware of ourselves and those messages and our internal intelligences, and how do we use those in a way that integrates our learning, integrates our experiences into the long-term thinking, feeling, and behavior change. And we model these around our multiple intelligences, the neural networks that exist in our head, our heart, and our gut, and our gut intelligences, our gut brains. And in these different areas, when we tap into their unique neural networks, we can create more integration that isn't just focused on the head, but is focused on the entire body. So when we do this practice of real reflection, we review what is it that we know, we explore what is it that what are we truly feeling. We look at what action do we need to take, what do we deeply need to do, and then what are we learning? How are we becoming? How are we continuously improving and evolving ourselves to keep getting better? And it's these practices that help us to have more emotional intelligence, improve our relationship, impact our creativity and innovation. It has a lot of positive impacts on performance. The third pillar is our competence. And we all know that when we are first learning how to do something, it takes a lot of effort and energy and focus. If you think about the first time you ever rode a bike, it was really hard. I've got kids who are learning right now. They fall down a lot. They're like, I'm never going to get this. They get frustrated because they have to really think about what they're doing. They haven't embodied that learning yet. And this is the difference between just knowing what you're supposed to do and really developing a proficiency at doing it. And when we're really proficient at something, we can do it with more effectiveness, enjoyment, ease, less effort, and have more energy. It takes less of our energy to actually accomplish it. And the way that I look at this is, again, kind of going back to the mountain. And as we're climbing our performance mountain, we're moving through different stages of our journey. We're moving through different levels of proficiency. So we start with just understanding. This is just knowing what those expectations are and what capabilities we need to make our journey. Then we have to integrate it, just like we just talked about. We have to feel it in our body. We got to integrate it into the way that we think, feel, and behave so that it becomes a part of us, so that we fully embrace it. Then we have to do it. So we have to actually do the developing. We have to apply those capabilities and really cultivate our competence, getting that regular feedback, getting that regular input to intentionally increase our proficiency, to intentionally keep increasing our level of being able to perform, and how easy it is for us to perform. And a lot of times people stop at that level. They stop at the doing and they don't get through the next level, which is the becoming stage or the evolving stage. And this is where we hit our capacity limits, where we know how to do it, but it takes a lot of energy. So when we're tired, we forget to do it. We stop giving feedback because we're overworked. We stop clarifying expectations or communicating regularly because we don't have any more we don't have any more space for anybody's emotions or their challenges. And so we stop at the doing. But the real magic happens when we move through this becoming stage, when we move through the blocks, barriers, and constraints, the things that keep our capacity limited, and we break through those until we can get to mastery, till we can achieve mastery where we're just being exceptional. So think about once you've learned how to ride a bike, where you can do it without thinking about it. You don't have to think about how you're doing it. Same thing with driving a car. When you first started driving, you had to be hyper focused and pay attention to everything. After years of driving, you can probably drive to work and forget everything about the drive because you were thinking about other things, because you were on autopilot. That's when it becomes part of our ways of being. I don't have to think about calling people up to accountability. It's just what I do. I don't have to think about or intentionally follow a process for feedback. I just always give my feedback in a conscious way because it's part of my ways of being. And that's where we want people to get with those 4 key capabilities, so that they can be operating at and achieving results at a high level of peak performance. And not only that, once it's embedded in our ways of being, we can really support others on their journey. We can really help them to and partner with them to support them on getting to that level of mastery. Our last pillar is this capacity pillar that I talked about is really the biggest challenge that people are having today, where they're at capacity. So no matter how much more we train them, give them in terms of information, knowledge, etc., there's no space. They can't implement any of it. They can't fit any more in. And when it comes to capacity, I look at these different dimensions, right? We've got physical capacity. Can I physically do it? Energetic capacity, do I have the energy for it, or am I in a dysregulated or a balanced state? Our cognitive, our brain capacity, our emotional and social capacity, our intuitive, our gut intelligence capacity. And in the center, I have our spiritual capacity. Not everyone has has a spiritual side to them, but I include it, although it's not a place in the human body necessarily, because it can also be a drain for people. It can also be a constraint on people's ability to move through blocks and barriers to embedding practices that can help us operate at our best. And when we work on this, when we expand our capacity, when we push through these barriers, is where we really become more resilient, more adaptable, where we can make better decisions, where we're more effective. All the things that we talked about that our workplaces really want in people, and we really want our people doing today. So what's the result? This is the journey of transformational growth to mastery, where we start with what? Those 4 key capabilities, knowing and understanding and building them, integrating them with real reflection and regularly connecting with our intelligences to embed it into our neural pathways, doing it, experiencing it, regularly working to increase our proficiency and cultivate our competence as we kind of climb that mountain to mastery, moving through then those constraints, getting through the things that would keep us from reaching mastery or being exceptional, until finally we get to our result of being at mastery, where we have these solid pillars, these solid foundations for our performance. And we can do this both at an individual and at an organizational level to equip workplaces and people with the skills, capabilities, capacity, consciousness, and competence that they need to be successful. So I don't want to leave you with just here's the model. I want to give you some examples of how you can get started. What are ways that you can start upgrading your operating system around these 4 pillars? So the first is around increasing capabilities. So today, a lot of organizations still, despite all of the research that shows that this is ineffective, use a lot of performance management and reviews practices. And performance management and reviews are really a structured process by which an organization monitors, evaluates, and manages the performance of people. And the challenge with this is management's important. We want to manage projects. We want to manage tasks. We want to manage programs. We want to manage systems and processes. But people are different. What we really want to do with people is we want to partner with them. And we want to shift from a management and review practice to a partnership where 2 people come together or groups of people come together to support one another's performance through a collaborative relationship where there's that ongoing support, accountability, feedback that's helping to enhance performance. And the difference between these 2 approaches is really in how those relationships form. In a performance management relationship, it's a much more vertical relationship. There's a clear differentiation in terms of power, authority, or status between the individuals or those that are involved. There's a vertical relationship, and that creates a power dynamic that prevents deeper trust, deeper self-awareness, more vulnerability and openness, more ability to engage in healthy conflict. Whereas a partnering relationship is more of a horizontal relationship, and it's characterized by cooperation, equality, where communication's flowing freely, where everybody's participating and valued. So instead of looking at this person knows more than this person, we look at two people as they each have wisdom and intelligence to offer to one another, and how can they come together to support one another. So if I am working with or partnering with a member of my team, I'm looking at how can we be successful together? Here's the things that we need to get done. What can you contribute? How can I support you in that? How can we accomplish this together so that we can get to those results? Which you can imagine creates a much different relationship than I'm managing you. These are the tasks I want you to accomplish. Now go accomplish them. Around the second pillar, there's a real difference between how we've thought about self-awareness and consciousness in the workplace. Traditionally, we approach it as leave your emotions at work. These are personal issues. We don't want to bring them to work. And so I would argue we need to move to where we can accept emotions, and past patterns are just part of human beings. I like to say that wherever you go, your body goes with you. You cannot leave your body at home. And so if your body is experiencing emotions, if your body has patterns, you cannot separate the two things. You may be able to separate and not think about a particular challenge for a couple of hours, but you're not actually separating or eliminating those emotions from your body. They are still there beneath the surface. So if we can acknowledge that emotions are part of human intelligence and that past patterns exist there, then we can start to look at what are the practices that can help to support it. We also need to move from really high stress cultures that put people into survival oriented states into environments that are just all about surviving, always work harder. Everybody has to be working the hardest they possibly can. That puts people in a constantly dysregulated state. And instead embed time for coherence, reflection, checking in, identifying motivations and eliminating those constraints so that we're actually producing the results instead of just being stressed and appearing busy. We need to move from the types of survival triggers that we often see in organizations like blame, judgment, deflection, finger pointing to more enhanced emotional and embodied intelligence. When I'm really conscious and coherent and using all of my intelligences, I'm not blaming, I'm not judging, I'm not finger pointing. I am consciously engaging to try to move things forward, to look for what is the best, most effective path to progress and to move things forward. And then finally, we need to get rid of the lack of safety or the fear-based cultures. When we perpetuate cultures filled with fear, it will always inhibit performance rather than propel it. And so instead, we want to foster safety with real-time, conscious, and effective feedback. So third pillar, competence. Most of the time when we look at development or growth or training, we approach it in a really separated and siloed way. We have isolated one size fits all trainings. We send people away to a training that then they don't actually bring back and integrate and embed. There's not as much training for most people. It's really leaders get the bulk of it, and everyone else is expected to kind of just know how to communicate effectively or to give one another feedback. And more often than not, especially when it comes to learning and development, we're more focused on the learning or the training side and not so focused on the development, the experiential learning, and the doing side, and making sure there's opportunities for doing on a regular basis. So I would contrast that with an approach that is daily development to mastery. How am I embedding practices where I'm engaging daily in real reflection, where I am engaging daily in micro training and learning? So I'm slowly enhancing and moving in small ways towards that level of mastery, where everyone's getting development and there's time for an opportunity for regular feedback and experiences. Because if there's no time for them to get feedback on, did I do that well? Did I not do that well? you're not going to increase people's proficiency. So really a shift in style from classroom traditional training to more, how is this embedded so that we're kind of every day talking about and working on our development in our various partnership conversations and interactions. And then finally, expanding capacity. So, you know, a lot of times organizations associate peak performance or high productivity with the high stress, hustle, and burnout. So lots of time pressure and prioritizing productivity, busy, hard work, long hours, lots of sacrifice, constant multitasking, rushed decisions to meet deadlines, overcommitment, perfectionism, no time for learning or development. And I want to contrast that with a culture where there's coherence, creativity, compassion, and courage, where instead of focusing on time, we focus on people's energy management so that we get the best, most effective outcomes and results rather than just the most amount of people's times. And we're interested in what those outcomes are rather than how many hours someone took to accomplish those outcomes, where people are coherent, they're balanced, they're reflecting, they're conscious before they engage. They don't get into all of the blaming, finger pointing things we talked about earlier. Where we have more creativity, innovation, and problem solving, where we have compassion and higher levels of trust and connection, where we have courageous, authentic action taking and resilience, and conscious and wise decision making. And the results of making changes like some of those I've included here is that you're going to see improved performance, well-being, and business outcomes. All of those metrics we said at the beginning that are currently indicating people are probably struggling the most that they ever have in as long as we've tracked many of those metrics, you will see the opposite be true. And so what can you expect? So at an individual level, you can expect individuals to transform their ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And so that means they're going to be more creative. They're going to be more compassionate. They're going to be more courageous. So they're going to make better decisions, solve problems. They're going to improve their relationships. They're going to be more motivated and take more action, have more action plans. And it's going to overall impact their performance, engagement, energy, and well-being. At a group level or team level, if we take this and work this within teams, we're going to see an improvement in terms of execution, efficiency, quality, and communication. The team is going to work more effectively. They're going to be more cohesive and collaborative. They're going to have more of a sense of connection, belonging, inclusion, and safety. And they're going to tend to be able to adapt and take initiative and be more accountable to the things that they're encountering and dealing with. They're going to be committed to the work that they're doing. And when things change, they're going to shift and they're going to work together to accomplish that. And then at an organizational level, we're really transforming the culture. We're transforming the system in which the organization is operating. And that's going to impact business results and outcomes, experiences and engagement, performance and productivity, ownership and resiliency, clarity and alignment, innovation and agility, strategy and systems. It's going to increase trust and decrease conflict. So if these are things that sound interesting to you, if these are results that you would like to see for yourself or your team or your organization, then I encourage you to consider looking at how is your current operating system today. And we've created a guide that's called Assessing Your Current Operating System. There's a typo on that slide, but that's okay. Assessing Your Current Operating System. And that gives you some questions to just start thinking about your current operating system and its performance around those 4 keys and those 4 pillars, to think about where you are today. And the final thing I want to leave you with as I wrap up this webinar is, if you want that resource, you can scan that QR code or you can go to our website. Everybody who subscribes to our website gets access to our free resource library that will have that guide along with dozens of other guides and webinars and free resources on there. But I want you to walk away with one thing that you can teach or share with someone else about what you just learned. Because when we take something and we teach someone else, it gets more deeply embedded into our neural pathways. I love the quote, all true knowing is in the doing. So if we can take it, do it, and teach it, then it's more likely to stick with you and get embedded in your ways of being for the future. So I appreciate everybody who has checked out this webinar and taken the time to watch it. If you have any questions or want to learn more or go further, please reach out to us. You can reach out via our website, our email, contact@evolvingtoexceptional.com, and we would be happy to connect with you and learn more about your experience and what you thought of what we shared here today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will be back again next month with another webinar.